possession of a firearm without the requisite permissions or certificates, licenses, is not a crime. What we are saying is that there is another tier that is added when you consider going into public spaces and making people fearful to interact or to be present. And so you are ultimately seeking to terrorize the public. Mr. President, I think that when we speak about the domestic terrorism bill, there is a level of uncertainty because we have this international or historical context of how terrorism has been defined by other jurisdictions and what we believe terrorism to be, how it impacts us. The bill covers, to some extent, the existing ones that you might find in other jurisdictions, and it deals with bias against race, nationality, ethnic origin, sex or sexual orientation, gender or religion. We also have an anti-terrorism act as well, but this bill specifically seeks to provide another level for those persons who well, I don't want to say unwittingly, because I believe that once you take it upon yourself to have a firearm and to do certain acts in public, you have opted to ignore that human life is at risk and that you should face the consequences. I want to close by saying very quickly that the people who choose violence should have to adjust their behavior to match the law, and not the persons who are law-abiding have to adjust their lives to accommodate the violence. We run the risk, if we are not stern, if we are not harsh, if we are not clear, if we are not decisive in normalizing violence in our communities. And that is one that we cannot afford. And so if this bill and the name of the bill disturbs you, I believe what you should be more disturbed about is the way that a small group of citizens have opted in many ways to undermine the fabric of our society and the Barbados that we know and love. I'm obliged.
Thank you very much, Senator Trim. Senator Slogan.
Mr. President, first, thank you for the leave. Permit me first, sirs, to extend my congratulations to a young Barbadian who I believe has done exceedingly well over the last few days. That is Thierry Gill, a young Barbadian who is playing in the English Champions League. And to a roaring crowd, sir, championship, sir, that's correct. He will get to the Premier League one day, sir, and we will celebrate. And sir, I want to congratulate him. Certainly, he would have done exceedingly well by scoring his first goal playing for the Bolton Wanderers, sir. So I'd like to congratulate him. Sir, I want to deal with the debate at hand. And, sir, this bill, as a young Barbadian and a young legislator, has caused for me to contemplate the circumstances of human existence. It has also led for me to examine the state of affairs in our country today, sir. And I do so well knowing that this particular bill, to my mind, and by design can only be categorized as part of a series of legislative proposals that have come certainly in my time before this chamber. Sir, when I take into consideration these proposals or these bills, certainly it's clear that government is on a trajectory to address the challenges with crime and violence in our society. And therefore, from the outset, I just want to state that I do support this bill. I support this bill, but I want to offer some observations. I believe for the contemplation not just of government, but for the wider public, sir, who listens to these debates. Sir, there are some words that a society should never use casually. Sir, words matter. And terrorism is one of them. It is, to my mind, the very reason why Senator Malalu may have shared his concerns with the title of the bill. But, sir, terrorism, a word, it carries a particular weight. It is a word, sir, that leaves us to question, how did we get here? And it's the very same question that I asked in a previous debate discussing legislation pertaining to crime and violence in our society. Yes, domestic terrorism, sir, in its truest sense, may be an academic term for some. It may be foreign in the sense of our public discourse. And I wonder this morning, when I came through the green gates there, if I exited those and had a conversation with some of the Barbadians that I first interacted with, and asked them, do you believe that Barbados has domestic terrorists? What their response would be. And I'm not sure, sir, that they would be able to seriously give you an immediate answer that provides you with a level of appreciation that they understand the consequences that this bill essentially is trying to outline. Sir, so when a parliament such as ours enshrines the words domestic terrorism in the statute books of this land, we should not treat this as ordinary legislation. We should feel the very weight of those words which I spoke about. We are not accustomed to thinking that, of Barbados through the language of domestic terrorism. And, sir, perhaps that is the very reason why this debate matters. The language we are now using represents a significant shift in how we understand, how we respond to serious violence in our society. I want, sir, to therefore impart the wisdom or the question, therefore, that our father of independence, Sir Errol Walton Barrow, placed before this country. And he asks, what is our mirror image? And I think that question then, in 1986, served its particular purpose. But it reminds us now, or asks of us now, to simply ask that question once again of our society. What is our mirror image? Sir, I say this with all due respect, not just to you, sir, and the Attorney General, but this Parliament can define an offense. This Parliament, sir, can establish a penalty. Parliament can state greater powers to give to the judiciary in the implementation of, or in the process of which they're implementing. And so Parliament can pass legislation with words such as domestic terrorism. But the truth is, sir, Parliament cannot legislate a healthy society into existence. And that is something, sir, I am mindful that even in the tributes last week by the Honourable Senator who has responsibility for culture, spoke in a similar vein about not being able to legislate culture. It is no different now. You cannot legislate a healthy society into existence. Sir, that work is done elsewhere. It is not our job. That work is done in our homes. It's done in our schools. It's done in our communities. It's done in our churches. So therefore, I must tell you, I have grown weary, sir, of the broader discourse in our society that tends to often play this blaming game, shifting the responsibility. It's not my job, it's the family's job, it's the church job. You hear the conversations day in, day out, whenever there's a surge of violence or some act as this bill is trying to legislate, as we will therefore call domestic terrorism. The family says that the community has failed. The community says the state has failed. The state then turns around and says the family has failed. And perhaps, sir, the uncomfortable truth is that all of us have failed. In some form or fashion, all of us have failed. We must now, sir, ask ourselves the question, how do we move forward? Because if we only become serious, sir, about a person when they become a criminal, we have already arrived too late. And if we only become serious about violence when we are forced to call someone a domestic terrorist, then, sir, we may have arrived even later. Sir, this bill asks of us to strengthen the hand of the state and that of the criminal justice system in particular. But I believe we must also strengthen the hand of the society. That means looking at the family. It means rebuilding communities. It means, sir, demanding better from the state. And ultimately, it means, to my mind, sir, accepting that crime is not somebody else's responsibility. It's a problem, it's a challenge for all of us. Crime and violence, or so this bill calls it, domestic terrorism, does not point fingers. And therefore, we cannot do so either, Mr. President. We are here now. We have to confront the reality, and we have to move expeditiously. Because I'm afraid, sir, that the consequences that we are facing today will only become worse as time goes on. And I am inclined to agree with a legislator in the other place, sir, equally. She suggested, sir, that longer sentences by themselves do not solve or address crime and violence. Senator King may very well know that as someone who worked in rehabilitating young Barbadian men. And let me be clear, I am not arguing that people who commit serious crimes, sir, should not be punished or they should not face the full weight of the law. Of course they should. There are cases where imprisonment is necessary to protect the public, to hold an offender accountable. But, sir, where Parliament is creating a legal response to conduct as serious as contemplated in this bill, we must be equally clear. There must be consequences proportionate to the conduct. But, sir, I am also concerned that we have to be careful with what we are promising the public today. I am hopeful that this legislation is not presented to the public in any form or fashion to be a savior, as the mechanism through which government or the judiciary will be able to address the underlying challenges our country faces. So yes, I agree with the legislation, but I think that it is not the principal piece to the puzzle in which we are trying to fix. I'm not suggesting in either form or fashion, sir, that the good Attorney General labeled it as such. But what I am suggesting is that there are far more important discussions that we need to be having in our country today. There's an important distinction, Mr. President, between saying that this legislation is necessary to address a particular aspect, and there's a difference between saying that this legislation will make our country safer. And to my mind, that is a far greater consideration at this time. I want to table, sir, for the consideration of the Chamber. And while I will not quote, sir, I will reference the United States National Institute of Justice in its 2016 review of the evidence. And sir, they put the matter in language that ordinary people can understand. Increasing the severity of punishment does little to deter crime. The evidence suggests that longer prison terms produce, at best, a very modest additional deterrent effect. Think about it in ordinary human terms, sir. We must not table the notion that if a young man carrying a firearm, led or part of a gang, decides to go into a public space, open a firearm, start shooting up the place, that the difference between 10, 15, 20 years, that when he is incarcerated, on his return to the public, that he is suddenly a changed man. Perhaps, for some, it will result in a change in behavior. But the evidence, sir, suggests that we should not build our national crime strategy. We should not base our approach on that assumption. And this is where I believe we must be careful about what this bill represents. Not what it does, but what it represents and how it is interpreted by the public. It can strengthen the state's ability to respond. It can establish consequences, sir, for conduct that Parliament today may determine to be so sufficiently grave that warrants this particular legislation. And maybe so. But it cannot prevent the young man, Mr. President, from being recruited in the first place. It cannot replace a parent. It cannot teach a child to read. It cannot deal with some of the social issues, many of the social issues we are seeing in our society today. Your Honor, I want to really table that the last report made to this Parliament by the Barbados Probation Service was in 2016. And I will acknowledge, however, that they are available up to, I believe, 2024 on the Probation Department's website, stand to be corrected. But the 2016 report 10 years ago, sir, it indicated that 57.4, meaning that almost 60%, sir, of our offenders, our repeat offenders, 60% of those would become repeat offenders, 57.4 to be accurate. And I think that this triggers the question or the suggestion. If we are going to address the challenges with crime, I believe that we need to take a more data-driven approach holistically. Now, I believe that these kinds of legislation, when presented to this Parliament, we've seen them over the last few months, over the last parliamentary term, sir, we need to articulate again the broader vision for the crime prevention and mitigation strategy of this country. And I don't think, sir, that while we are speaking in terms of isolation, that we are not collectively bringing these matters together for the consideration of the public. And the truth is, I want to state clearly that we also have the challenges in our society, those social issues that I believe we must grapple with seriously. We need to ensure, yes, that we teach civics in our schools, emotional regulation, intelligence, these aspects, communication skills. But, sir, we must also fix the deficits in our system. With overcrowded classrooms and overburdened teachers, sir, these, sir, are the genesis of some of the challenges that we face today. And while we may not be willing to admit that these are some of the challenges, it is part of the reason why a lot of the mitigation efforts, sometimes, we miss them. Some of our young men, sir, are entering secondary schools without the ability to read. Some of our young men are entering secondary school without the ability to read. And I heard the aside that because the parents are not teaching them. That comes down once again, sir, to the very same blame game that I'm speaking of. Now, I want to impart, sir, and congratulate in passing that of a program at the Barbados Community College, that of the Babs Reading Clinic. And sir, I realize through their reporting that we have even teenage boys about to leave secondary school who don't even understand phonics. Now, some may argue, what does this mean in relation to this particular legislation which we are debating, and rightfully so. What I am trying to fundamentally address, sir, is that the core issues our society faces, they don't start at the point when we find a young man going into Sheraton Mall and decide to shoot up the place, or at dockside of a cruise. These are some of the fundamental challenges that we need to address, sir. And I want to close, Mr. President, by also making a few recommendations for this chamber. And I know that Senator Archer may be bound by collective responsibility, and therefore I will make a case for him, even on the point of addressing our community intervention programs at the level of the state. I also want to take into consideration, or for this chamber to also acknowledge, that we need greater interventions in our communities when it comes to young people. I acknowledge that on the part of, in the last budgetary debate, there were provisions made to support, financial provisions made to support churches, and that is through the church sector, through the Ministry of Labor. I recognize that there are provisions for the Community Development Department and that of the Division of Youth Affairs. And while there's already good work being done, sir, the truth is there needs to be more. We need to support our young people in a greater way so that they can feel a part of a society, they feel a sense of belonging. And the truth is, while we acknowledge that there are programs that are occurring, I don't believe that we are capturing abroad or spreading abroad enough net, not the net that Senator Goodrich spoke about, but we need to spread a broader net to catch more young people, especially those who are most vulnerable in our society. Yes, we need to address parenting. Yes, we need to address the role that the church plays. Yes, we need to look at the intervention programs in our communities. But if there's anything that I want and I hope that from the asides that this chamber can take from this presentation, sir, for my contribution, is that we must take the bull by the horn. We cannot feel comfortable knowing that there are still many of the social challenges in our country that are going unaddressed. I said from the outset, sir, this is not a blame game. This is not a case of throwing the dice and seeing where they fall. But, Mr. President, it requires of all of us to take a holistic approach. And finally, I want to start where I end, sir, where I began. In 1986, May 1986, I said the father of independence asked the question, what is our mirror image? I believe that is a very relevant question that we should ask as we leave this place. Not just who is in the mirror, but we should also ask as individuals in the mirror, what role can we play to address the challenges that we face with crime and violence, so that we don't have more young men falling victim or to eventually be considered or labeled as domestic terrorists, as this legislation would so intend. Mr. President, I thank you for your time. I'm very much obliged to you.
Thank you very much, Senator Slocum. Senator Nels.
Good afternoon, Mr. President. Good afternoon, fellow senators, honorable ministers. I am not going to skirt around the bill. The bill is an absolute necessity. It is much required in the context of where we are today. There's no discussion about that. We could play with the semantics of the word terrorism, whether international or domestic. We could go all around the world on that. The reality is that we live in the 21st century, and there are individuals in societies across this world who decide, for whatever reason, that they're going to wake up and terrorize communities. Barbados is no exception. Barbados is no exception. There are people who live in this country in constant fear. I think this bill adds weight to where we are to ensure that we send a strong message to all those delinquent persons out there who decide that they're going to do something different. If left to me, I would have taken a slightly different perspective on it, but I no longer wear a military uniform, so I would not necessarily do that. I had the privilege on Saturday to sit and watch the 47th anniversary parade of the Barbados Defense Force. And for many people, and for quite a few of us who were sitting there, we were there on day one of the establishment of the force. And I'm proud today that that force and the brigadier, when he spoke, could speak of all of the areas that Barbados has sent their troops to effectively help in any form or fashion. But those troops, after 47 years, have not come on the streets of Barbados. I don't mean going out on a joint patrol with the police. They have not yet come on the streets of Barbados. We are not Trinidad today, sir. We are not Jamaica. We don't have captive areas within this country. But if left on its own without legislation like this, we will have that. When you drive Bridgetown, I am fortunate that every evening I drive through Bridgetown. I get to Fairchild Street, and it's normally about 5, 6 o'clock. And when you get, there, I don't understand. 5, 6 o'clock is very, very early. Very, very early. It's not dark. But for those of us, when we get there at that hour, right, before National Street becomes the main, for those who go later in the evening, right? I just thought I'd put that there, right? The reality, though, is that when we drive there, and I stop there, and you get to those lights and you make that left turn to come to River Road, you see innocence. You see a collection of people all hustling for a minibus, with minibuses all over the road, and you literally see an area that we know would have had some violence in the past. And you say to yourself, do I need to make this left turn or should I keep straight? Do I want to be caught in that area where there's no escape really? And for some of us, we decide we're going to go through there because we're not going to retreat, we're not going to surrender, we're not going to give it up. And we drive those places. But there are many people in Barbados who don't drive those places anymore, all because there are some individuals in this society who believe that they have the biggest guns. When last I checked, they do not have the biggest guns. The biggest guns still reside on the police service or in the Barbados Defense Force. They don't have the biggest guns, just to be clear. But they believe that they can use their guns that they have indiscriminately. And this bill decides that, you know what, if you decide you're going to do that, we're done with this. The long talk finish. We're going to catch you, and you're going to be charged under this bill, and you're going to go away for a very, very long time. And that is what is important. We shouldn't try to worry too much about how the lawyers are going to interpret the law. That's for the lawyers to do. I'm not a lawyer. We shouldn't worry about trying to label it. We shouldn't worry about the individuals who can't read or write when they leave secondary school. All of those things are being addressed. We have enough things that are going on in society to address those. But the reality and the fundamental reality is that we constantly have, as a civil society, we constantly have to send strong messages to all of those people who decide. So come tomorrow, when we pass this bill here this evening, come tomorrow, all of the roadside lawyers who advise their clients as to how much time they can get and how they're going to get off will have something else to worry about. The day that you go and you decide you're going to go to Sheraton, or you're going to run through a school, or you're going to go anywhere you decide you're going to go and can make an act like this, then that's one more thing now they have to consult their potential clients, the ones on the block who they advise, no, you could go long. You're going to get them on 3 years for that, or you can get them on 4 years for that. Now, this is another piece of, this is a sharper tool in the arsenal of the law-abiding citizens as to where we want to be able to get to. Like the fact that it dealt with the issue of recklessness, because that is where the essence it is. Recklessness, and we shouldn't shy away from these words. They're reckless in their behavior. You know, they don't care. They just don't care. I'm going to take out that fella, I get some money, I'm going to go take you out, and wherever they are, they go spray down the place. Everybody lives in fear. There are so many cameras, big dogs, cane corsos, you name it, pit bulls, all the big dogs. You can't find a big dog in Barbados, because everybody's trying to find one of those dogs to help to protect them. And I'm saying no, that should not be where we want to go to. People should be able to leave their homes and go anywhere in this country at any time, day or night, to make and get back home safely without fear of running into somebody that is going to try to harm them. And we got to ensure that we have the legislative framework to do that, and not worry too much about picking on this and picking on that and worrying about this and worrying about that. I leave that to the Honourable Attorney General and the lawyers when they get in front of the law courts of Barbados to be able to do that. But we got to get them there, and they got to go there under a law. And the law that they need to go there when they do these reckless acts is this particular piece of legislation. They should not be going there under the gun crime or under domestics, any other thing. They should really be going there specifically being dealt with as what they are. They are domestic terrorists. There is no debate about that. That is who they are. And if they want to behave like that, then we have to have the law in place to adequately punish them accordingly. I also like the fact, sir, that it went outside of the box a little bit, in my opinion, and the Honourable Attorney General discussed that already, because it also went into the realm of firearms and ammunition. And it was a little bit odd to see legislation this sort of like step into the left But there is a reality as well. An extended magazine on an AK-47, when last I checked, is about 36 rounds. You can double them. You can see when you watch the movies, fellas flip them, double them, put them on, that's 72 rounds. And you don't want to be caught nowhere near one of those weapons when they're going to automatic mode. And similarly for any other high-powered piece of machinery. We have to deal with it for what it is. And there are a lot of people that would want that to be recognized. You can't have those types of weapons. As a matter of fact, as far as I'm concerned, I don't see the need for anybody in Barbados to have a shotgun. I don't see the need for any Barbadians to have a rifle outside of a sporting event. I can see the need for some people to have firearms in a way, but limited. I don't even see the need for people to have Glock 17s and all of these fancy firearms. Standard firearms, if you so think you need to be protected, you know, the good old 38s or 25 or something like that. But when you go up in the upper end of Glock 17s and 45s and all of those kind of things, you find yourself in these awkward situations where you find yourself in these awkward situations where there is a lot of firepower on the part of people. And you know, we talk about it one way and we need to speak about it another way. Because when I sat there and I look at all of those young soldiers on parade at the Barbados Defense Force, and I drive the streets of Barbados and I see all of those young police men and women patrolling the streets of Barbados, and all they have on is that bulletproof vest, that ain't going to be much help in front of an AK-47 blasting at you. It's going to walk up the top and it's going to come down to the bottom. When last I checked, nobody got the bulletproof mask, heads, or anything like that. You take out your legs, you take out your heads. So we have to be able to address that in the strongest way possible. And as I said before, I am pleased to see that this particular aspect has also crept into here. If you have those types of weapons at your home, then there's only one thing that you can be doing, nothing else, in my opinion. You're either plotting to overthrow the government, you're plotting a coup, you're plotting mass destructions, you're doing all of these things. They have no place in this society. And we have to recognize it for what it is. You are a terrorist if you have that level of firepower at your house or wherever you decide to stash it. So I'm pleased that it also took into account that aspect of it, sir. And, you know, we have to recognize it and we need to move forward from there. So I'm not going to dwell on it much longer, except to say, sir, that I think it is a nice piece of legislation. I think it addresses a loophole, not necessarily a loophole, that's the wrong phrase, an area within the law to be recognized in the 21st century. And with that, sir, I'm obliged.
Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, as I begin my brief contribution, I would like to commend the Barbados Police Service for the work done over the Kwapova season. I've been out and about for the season, and their presence was definitely felt. And from all reports, we had a very successful Kwapova season from a security perspective, Mr. President, and I want to commend them for all of their work that they continue to do. Also want to join with Senator Nels in acknowledging the 47 years of the Barbados Defense Force existence. And I hope that Barbados and the Parliament will continue to support these two great institutions as we look at securing our borders and making our people safer. Mr. President, I definitely don't want to be going into a shopping complex and having to
be running for my life. I definitely don't want to be going to a basketball match or volleyball match on a hard court in any community, having to be dodging bullets. Definitely don't want to be going to a normal karaoke session and having to fear for my life. Mr. President, what has been happening in Barbados in recent times with this gun violence is something that needs to be controlled. And a strong message has to be sent to those persons who decide that they are going to take up an illegal firearm and go and seek revenge or whatever they have against one person, but also bring a whole set of people in harm. And I acknowledge, Mr. President, that this bill is attempting to deal with that. And I don't think that any right-thinking person would want to go against the intent of the bill. My only concern and my short contribution will focus primarily, Mr. President, on the fact that there has been some discussion, and I did a little research, and I'm kind of weighing on the side of those who believe that this law that we're looking to pass today, or this bill that we want to make law, is it covered elsewhere, Mr. President? And is it necessary? Because I think one of the things we have to ask ourselves is that what we don't want is we just don't want legislation for legislation's sake. We don't want that there's a government that because there's a national cry to do something to curb crime that we just put and table all different sorts of legislation. Previous senator presentation spoke to the fact that there are other legislation that might be able to address some of these issues, Mr. President, and how can we use existing legislation, strengthen that legislation, and still have the same effect. So what specific gap in our existing law are we filling by creating this new offense, Mr. President? That, to me, is one of the most important questions government should answer during this debate. If someone murders another person, we already have an offense of murder. If someone unlawfully possesses a firearm, we already have laws dealing with firearms. If somebody uses a firearm, Mr. President, and seriously injures another person, that is already serious criminal conduct. If a person's engaged in a shootout in a public place and innocent members of the public are endangered, Mr. President, they're already exposed to serious criminal consequences. So what could government do yesterday? What could government not do yesterday that it will be able to do today or tomorrow when this bill is passed? And that is a reasonable question. This is a practical question. And I've heard the Attorney General in his presentation, and I think he made reference to the fact that it gives the judiciary or the judge some teeth in terms of the sentencing of those crimes, Mr. President. But my short research shows that, Mr. President, in the shooting that occurred at Sheraton Mall with the murder and the public shooting that everyone alludes to today, the person that was sentenced or that committed that crime, that person was sentenced to life in prison, Mr. President. My research also tells me that with the Campus Trends murder, one of the accused, Mr. President, was sentenced to hang. So this tells me, Mr. President, that there is already enough teeth in the system, in the judicial system, by the judges to exercise their discretion for tough sentencing. So if that is the case, Mr. President, what is the gap that is intended to be filled with this particular legislation? We are in no way saying that these crimes should not go without harsh treatment, but we are saying that this seems just to be another layer of legislation when it is already covered in an existing law. But, Mr. President, I know law is a real technical subject. I know the lawyers would want to really respond in a technical way, but from a broad perspective, simple research, brazen shootings, public fear. We've had situations where we've had life sentence. We've had situations we've had sentence by hanging, Mr. President. So in my short contribution, Mr. President, that is what I really want to focus on. If the government can give some clarity on what is the gap that this bill genuinely fills in practicality, in reality, when we consider those realities. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. Senator Aline.
Thank you, Mr. President. Few statements have been made, and I believe there's a need for some clarification. The Honourable Attorney General was clear, and it stated on the first line of the objects and reasons, this is a bill to penalize. This is a bill to penalize. This is not a bill to rehabilitate. This is not a bill to seek to deal with social issues. This is a bill to penalize. So when the goodly Senator Slocum reminds us quite correctly that this piece of legislation is not going to fix the substantive problem, I think everyone in this room and this government certainly recognizes it. When he gives an impression, and I say an impression which I will not impute any malice of intent, but when he gives an impression that, that this government is not dealing with the matter of crime in a holistic manner, that is unfortunate. We stood in this chamber, I believe, for a period of 4 days during the estimates debate. And we considered initiative after initiative aimed at dealing with crime at its core, dealing at its crime in terms of a preventative nature. We had the Youth Advanced Care Program, Building Blocks Program, Youth Entrepreneurial Scheme Program. We invested significant funds in the third sector. So, parenting programs. Each community has a center dealing with elements to try and hit crime at its core, at its early, at its formative stage. So I don't want the idea to run amok that this government is seeking to deal with crime only in one aspect. There has been substantial investment at every line item that we can see that will deal with addressing the criminal program. And I go back to the line, this legislation is to penalize. So when my friend Senator Walters asks, what more are we doing? And he was quite correct to say, well, you know, lawyers may look at these things differently. And he referenced the fact that a certain sentence of life was passed on an individual. What we need to understand is that a life sentence in the context of this country has a specific period. I believe that period is in the nature of 30 years. So that the realities and the considerations are such that a person who's sentenced to life has an opportunity to get out of prison after a certain number of years has passed. Now, if this legislation was in place when a certain activity went down at Sheraton, he would be getting the possibility of a life sentence with 30 years and a consecutive sentence that any judge might have considered reasonable for a person who takes a firearm and starts to shoot in a crowded public area. So what this legislation would do is to say that if no more than to protect the populace from individuals like this, we will leave you incarcerated until a point that when you return to this society, you are no longer a potential danger. And that is important for the people of this country to know. So yes, there are 2 charges that will be laid upon a person, and there is the possibility that an individual who is so callous, so reckless, will pay a substantive price. And this government is not in any way shame to say this is the effort that we are making. This is necessary. This is in line with all the other efforts we have made relative to address crime. But this is a necessary piece of legislation to say to certain individuals, your acts will result in you paying a price that is heavy enough that we feel we are protecting the society at large. And the reality, Mr. President, is the issues being dealt with by this piece of legislation go to the morale of the populace. When these acts are perpetrated, the impact is wide. There was a study done which suggested that although only 37% of respondents were victims of crime, 90% of respondents were in fear of crime in this country. And that says to you that this type of activity spreads. It impacts everyone, the persons who have suffered it and the persons who no longer leave their house because of it. The elderly shut-in who no longer catches that bus her one outing to town to deal with her pension check, who now is fearful of going out. The parent who can't allow their child to go in the park unattended, and even if attended, still has to wonder what's the possibilities that can occur in the context of this type of activity. Criminals start to control our total environment. The total community is controlled by a few individuals. Where you're keeping people in homes, people are changing their standards and form of living. Businesses have to invest new monies in terms of security and the like. A small portion of the population holding an entire country to ransom. This bill deals with those situations and says that those individuals have to pay a steep, steep price. And I support it, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Senator Ali. Senator the Reverend Canon Dr. Rogers.
Thank you very much, Mr. President. I'll be just as brief as Senator Mallow was earlier today. Just to, first of all, congratulate those students who have received their results yesterday for CAPE and CSEC. And also to encourage the parents of those children who would not have done so well not to give up on their children. And also to encourage our schools, wherever possible, if there's a space, take those children back. Do not put them out in the street. This is yet another seminal piece of legislation coming again in the season of emancipation. And when we're on the cusp of 60 years of self-rule, it's unfortunate that we have to pass a bill called the Domestic Terrorism Bill, but it is just the nature of the society in which we live at this point in time. For this joins a cadre of other bills that we've had over the past few decades that have sought to deal with the plague of violence in our society. I believe those of us who have been following this society for some time now, at least in the last 30 years or so, would know that crime and violence has always been one of those things that have been on the front burner for us, because somewhere, somehow, our society just seems to have this problem. Unfortunately, last week, sir, I was unable to give a tribute on Sir Gary, but I could not help but think about him and his era as we discussed this bill, because I've been reflecting on the era in which persons like him would have grown up. He was born just about a year before the 1937 riots, when everything was depressed in this country. So the excuses we're making today for people about depressed situations, if you read the Moyne Commission about what Barbados and the region was like back in that time, one would understand that these people fought really hard against many, many challenges, but never once sought to destroy the community that nurtured them. In fact, it is only since his death that we've been persons have been reflecting, and you realize that he was really a colossus amongst us. And we didn't even realize, because as CLR James said, what he did went beyond the boundaries. It was not just cricket, it was a sociological impact that he had and psychological impact that he had on our region and our people in a time when openly they were all types of things stacked against him. You go to England, and yes, the crowd is showing you great adoration, but you know you have boys in the team that can't even stay in certain hotels. You're in a team with certain people, and only some of them can go to cocktails, and you can't go. This was the reality of his thing. But never once, as he said, every run I scored for the team. It was never for me. It was about the people. And so to reflect on such a figure and then have to come the next week and deal with a bill like this really tells us that we have a lot of work to do in our society, because to think that people who've been nurtured by this society, who have received just about every privilege one can possibly have, would think to destroy it. You know, and this administration, like others, find themselves in the position where, to the layperson looking on the outside, we're just throwing legislation at this problem. With no fault of ours, we're just trying to fix. Every time we see a loophole, we're just trying to do something. We've had the Criminal Gangs Prevention and Control Bill just recently. We had the crime prevention program, only to find out that money was going to people who were involved in active crime. The society needs a lot of work. And so I had to reflect seriously on the words of Tacitus, the Roman historian, who said, "The more corrupt the state, the more numerous the laws." I don't agree with much Tacitus says, because he called Christianity a mischievous suspicion. But a mischievous superstition. But I believe he's right here. The more corrupt society, the more numerous the laws. Voltaire, one of my favorites, put it another way. A multitude of laws in a country is like a great number of physicians. No offense. A sign of weakness and malady. And we know how Voltaire felt about physicians, so one can imagine how he felt about the laws. Voltaire was the one who said, I'll quote, the one about the priest I'll quote extensively at another time, and this one is pertinent at this time. Of physicians, he said, and I'm assuming he means laws here as well. Physicians take medicine of which they know little, put into our bodies of which they know less, to cure diseases of which they know nothing. And when one thinks about what we are involved in here, I am fearful. I'm fearful that the impression out there is that it's just another law. We know that somebody who knows somebody is going to put in a word for somebody, and then say, Kadir. Because that is the attitude in Barbados. That the laws, as Anatole France said in their majestic glory, forbid both the rich and the poor from sleeping on the bridges and drinking from ditches and eating from garbage cans. But we know only certain people will be affected by them. And we have to be careful that this is not the impression that is given out there, or if we think we have problems now. If people realize that this law is passed, but somehow it is not being equally administered, if we think we have problems now, we'll see problems after that. And so I just want to focus on Section 2 of the bill, Section 2, Part 3, the unlawful importation. And I think that this is an important part of the bill. Unlawful importation of firearms in such a quantity, and the quantity isn't stated, but we assume it's not just a fella smuggling one gun in a barrel. this particular part of the legislation may well be pointing, this part of the legislation may really be looking at some of the good citizens we have in this society. The people who are at every cockfight, in every picture, but somewhere behind the scenes are the ones who are responsible for bringing large quantities of firearms into our country. And it has implications for another thing. I'm going to go way left field here, sir. Stop me if I'm going wrong. I am wondering if, given that possibility, that this particular legislation could well net some of our good citizens, if this legislation shouldn't be accompanied by legislation on campaign financing. The reason why I raised that, sir, campaign financing is a very serious matter in our country. We see large sums of money being spent during electoral campaigns, and we assume that it is all clean. I have no doubt it is. I'm just talking futuristically here. What happens to a political party who is heavily funded by a good citizen who is found to be involved in domestic terrorism? What is the future of that political party? And I know it's not the ruling party here. This would never be applied to the ruling party. But I'm just saying that these are some of the, if we're going to get serious about what is taking place in our society, these are some of the areas we need to look at. To separate the arms of governance from what is taking place in the underworld in our country. I have no problem supporting this legislation. As I said, every loophole we find, we have to try to patch. But the reality is that we have an endemic problem in our society, and legislation after legislation as we pass them, who are we netting? Who are we netting? I remember Red Plastic Bag, sometime back in the 80s, had a song, "Me Hands Tied." I am a good fisherman. That's why I'm really feeling so bad. So many times across the ocean, but I couldn't hold big ones I had. If we live in a country where the big ones cannot be held and cannot be caught, this legislation is good on paper. But if we think we have problems in our society now, do not let it be administered equally and see what will happen. Those are all the words I have for this answer. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Senator Rogers. If there are no more speakers, then we'll have the wrap-up. Honourable Attorney General.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to thank all of the honourable members who spoke. I'm going to address some of the concerns raised. I want to thank the Honourable Senator Aline, who started my wrap-up for me by addressing some of the ones that were in front of him as he spoke. Sir, if I can just go through systematically. Senator Goodrich had asked, why not just amend the anti-terrorism legislation? Sir, because the anti-terrorism legislation deals with terrorism as people understand it generally. We've created a new offense of domestic terrorism. It does not fall properly under anti-terrorism because that deals with political and ideological changes and is in a certain context. This does not fall under that. This is serious criminal activities that happen in a particular circumstance. So it doesn't fall under there at all. We looked at it, we tried to find the easier out, it didn't go in there at all. Now, you said we should have amended or increased penalties in existing legislation rather than draft a whole new bill. Once again, we've created a new offense. So if we look at the firearm legislation deals with the possession of a firearm, it deals with things like that. The whole concept of introducing the terrorism aspect based on the circumstances of the crime and the place in which it was committed, and also the additional factor of the fact that it terrorized the public or caused the public outcry or caused the public to fear for their safety, right, necessitated it not being added to expand an existing criminal offense. Actually, Senator Walters touched on that as well when he asked, I want to quote you properly, what could government not do yesterday that they can do today after the bill is posed? And why not, what gap in existing legislation are we trying to fill? And are there not already laws governing possession and use of firearms? And you raised it was partially answered by Senator Allen. So where the offense is murder, the sentencing to run consecutively does not apply. You can't hang a man twice. You can't kill a man twice. But for everything else, you get charged with the principal offense. You get charged with possession of a firearm. You may get charged with using a firearm in public. You may get charged with wounding, something else. But you get another charge of domestic terrorism based on the fact that you shot that person at midday in Broad Street and have everybody fleeing. And if you get a life sentence under the core offense, the principal offense, and you get a life sentence under this, as Senator Ali indicated, life doesn't really mean life anymore, right? Most people get life commuted, I think, to 30 years or below that if you commute life. Or when you hit the 30 years, you consider to serve your sentence. Well, then you would have served your sentence for the first one. Then you would start to serve the life sentence for the domestic terrorism. Right? So that is what can be done after we pass this that could not be done before. And quite frankly, we had nothing that deliberately addressed the public fear. The public fear is an element that we have to take into consideration. We deal with the offense simpliciter. We deal with the action of the offense and the consequence of the offense on the victim, right? Sometimes in doing the penalty, you might hear from the victim's family and factor their concerns into the sentence. But you don't expand that to the whole public. You might have somebody saying that the man who was shot was a good provider, he was the sole breadwinner, whatnot, and this is how it impacts us. But we're not looking to the fact of the children who are going in to Cave Shepherd to buy the back-to-school supplies at the time that the person unleashed with the AK-47. So this now says we have a situation that we never contemplated before under any other legislation. We have people used to hide and do crimes. If you went looking to kill somebody, you went sneaking, trying to catch that person unawares, trying to catch them when they're coming home, trying to catch them someplace where it's dark and there are no witnesses. The criminals nowadays don't care about that. The more terror they can unleash, it seems to be the more attractive it is for them. They seek out persons in public spaces and don't shoot once. They spray them with loud, noisy, heavy-duty weapons. And not them, the whole area. They often discharge into a crowd. They may come to target one person, there are 5 people, they spray them all. That requires a completely different approach than anything we have in existing legislation. A whole set of other things that we need to contemplate. Let me pause for you and go back to Senator Goodridge. Senator Goodridge, you questioned the use of or versus and, but I think somebody answered that. And you said it should have been sent to Joint Select Committee. This is not a difficult bill. If you take out the first page with objects and reasons and the arrangement of sections and whatnot, this bill literally is just over 2 pages long. It's not everything we send to select committee. We send things to select committee if they are likely to be contentious, if they're likely to be divisive, if we require the public to weigh in on them. We as the government heard the cries of the public on this. I don't think there's anybody in Barbados who is not calling for something to address these type of offenses. So it wasn't necessary to send that to joint select committee. The clauses are not technical, right? They're very short, for the most part, in plain use. You question the use of what constitutes a threat to public safety, to define threat to public safety, but that's not even a work of art, that's common English, right? So I don't know how much further we could have distilled down the threat to public safety. I think everybody pretty much understands what a threat to public safety is. And you also said we need to define criminal conduct with precision. Once again, criminal conduct is conduct that offends the laws. So the other issue you raised was the possibility for somebody committing an act of cybercrime to be caught under this legislation, because the penalty for certain aspects of cybercrime would have been 7 years. But if you go back to the definition of domestic terrorism, which means it constitutes a serious criminal offense, so yes, cybercrime may stand to fall there at that level, and it has to satisfy any of the following conditions. It's committed in a public place. I can't see cybercrime satisfying that one. And not just that in committed in a public place, it's committed in a public place with the intention of causing the public or segment of the public to fear for the life or the safety of others, or recklessly or without regard for the safety of the public. I don't know what the person would have to post to actually achieve that. So I don't see it being caught there. Committed in a public place, motivated, but anyway, you get the point. So the point simply is that while there are many things that constitute serious criminal offenses, once you apply the second aspect of the application of the definition of domestic terrorism, they don't fall to be considered. So anybody who is, I'm not saying go and blog naughty things about people. I'm just saying that you're unlikely. I cannot see a circumstance where something simple under the Cybercrimes Act would stand to qualify as domestic. I actually can't think of any. So, the other thing, offending a transgender or offending somebody and causing the public to fear for their safety, or with the intention of causing the public to fear the safety or the safety of others, or recklessly without regard to safety, I suggest if the DPP and the Commission of Police was ever so misguided as to charge somebody who blogged something under domestic terrorism, I don't see it standing muster. But that's what courts are there for. Now, Senator Malalu, you query the use of the word domestic terrorism and the implications for the word. I think Senator Niles also touched on that briefly, and I believe Senator Rogers. We had to send a message. The title of this bill was not chosen lightly. And we came down on the fact that anybody who perpetrates an act so brazen as to cause a significant amount of our population to feel in fear of their life, then that is an act of terrorism. Although terrorism simpliciter normally involves, as I said, ideological change or some political message, that is what terrorism is. We accepted this did not fit into there, but it was no less terrifying and had no less an impact on the public of Barbados to warrant the title. That's why we labeled it domestic terrorism. And to make it plain what we meant by domestic terrorism, we then defined it. So I hear you. It was something that we addressed. It was something that we had considerable discussion on. But we also felt that we can't pretend that these acts are not as bad as they actually are, and to call them what they are. Senator Slocum made some I just want to address one thing you said. Through you, sir. Senator Slocum made a point that when a man shoots up the public and goes to jail for 10, 15, or 20 years, he does not automatically come out a changed man, right? And that this legislation does not prevent him from being recruited by a gang. It cannot replace a parent, whatnot. That was addressed by Senator Allen, but I want to say it again. At no point in time was this legislation intended to be all-encompassing. It was not intended to address multiple things. This is intended to address the most heinous of acts committed in public that cause Bajans to fear. And not just address them, but to punish them. I think we as a government have done considerable work in our social programming. Senator Allen once again went through a whole list of things that the government has actually done. In our social programming, in the prison we have rehabilitative programs. We literally, this government cares everything we can do to try to make things better, try to address the root causes of crime, try to get more children into school, try to provide training programs for people, the Coursera courses, everything that we can think of. When people come to the town hall meetings, the Paris Speaks meetings, and they make their comments, sometimes you see those comments appear the next year in the budget because we're listening and we're working. This bill is not meant to do that. There are 3 clauses in here, and they strictly deal with definitions and punishment, because that is the message we are sending. We are now going to punish you to the fullest extent of the law when you put God so far from your thoughts as to terrorize Barbadians and drive fear into the heart of Barbadians. So, I think I've addressed the bulk of the comments that were there. The one thing I will say, sir, is that Senator Goodrich raised it. It was raised by a couple of other people. We got it in comments that followed the debate in the other place as well. It was as well raised by some of the senators on this side. So it is a concern that we acknowledge is valid, and that deals with Clause 3.4. The commission of an act of domestic terrorism should be considered to be an aggravating factor which should be taken into account when imposing a sentence on the person who commits a serious criminal offense. The point is taken, sir, entirely, that the crime of domestic terrorism is a crime by itself. I think this was initially included when we were trying to subsume it into something else, right? But I take the point, and I thank you, Senator Goodrich, for being the first person to raise it here. And what it... Okay. So what I will do, sir, when we go into committee is actually move the deletion of that particular subclause. So having said that, I want to thank all of the senators for what effectively, sir, was an overwhelming support for the bill. It tends to echo what we've heard out there in the public as well. Barbadians are tired of the Wild Wild West situation. Barbadians are tired of people being reckless and having no care or consideration for anybody else. Barbadians are tired of gangsters making public statements at the expense of life and limb, not only of their targets, but in instances where other people are caught in the crossfire. We have heard you, Barbados. We have heard the people of Barbados. We've heard the people in rum shops. We've heard the people in the churches. We've heard the bloggers. And sir, we, the government, are tired as well. And this bill, this domestic terrorism bill, is our answer to the request from the people of Barbados. And I beg the Senate's honourable chambers favorable consideration as we move to the vote. I thank you, sir. So I beg to move it be read a second.
The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. It is yes, have it. This bill is passed a second time.
Mr. President, motions relating to the business were considered by the Senate and moved by Minister.
Senator Walcott.
Mr. President, I beg to move that Senator John Rogers be appointed Deputy President for the remainder of today's sitting. In other words, he will act for the remainder of today's sitting.
The question is that Senator the Reverend Canon Dr. John Rogers be appointed Deputy President for the remainder of today's sitting. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. Senator Canon Dr. Rogers is therefore Deputy President for the remainder of today's sitting. Thank you very much for agreeing to serve, Reverend Canon Rogers.
Mr. President, I beg to move that you do not leave the chair and this chamber resolve itself in committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that I do not leave the chair and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself in the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Acting Chair, Clause 1.
Mr. Acting Chair, I beg to move that Clause 1 stand part.
The question is that Clause 1 stand part. All those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. All those senators against, please say no.
Aye.
Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 2.
The question is that, oh, sorry.
I beg to move that Clause 2 do not stand part.
The question is that Clause 2 stand part. All those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. All those senators against, please say no. Oh. Yes, Senator Goodrich.
Sir, I just have a recommendation. And in terms of the sentencing and all I have said in this Honourable Senate today, I propose that there be an increase there to the sentence Clause 2B. It's just for consideration. We have that the individual person may, under or by virtue of any enactment,
Which section of clause?
This would be Clause 2, and you can go down to B on page 5. Yes, under the definition, sir.
Yes.
Under the definition of serious criminal offense, considering the meaning, so that the net wouldn't be so fine, my recommendation would be to move it up from the 5 years and perhaps start at 10 years, and that is just my recommendation. Thank you.
Sir, by way of explanation, I think generally serious criminal acts are in the category of 5 years or over, so it's not just for the purpose of this legislation. If you know, successive governments have moved towards trying to do anything other than incarcerate somebody. So we've moved to ticketing offenses, we've moved to civil penalties. We're trying to reduce sentencing. So if you get a sentence where you start at 5 years, that means that it's not something petty, it is considered worthy. But equally, sir, equally, in this context, understand the 5 is only the qualifying for the serious criminal offense. To still fall to be found guilty under this, you have to still satisfy the definition of domestic terrorism. So in this one in particular, it is only a qualifying standard, and applying the standard that the legislation normally applies to serious criminal offenses, which is 5 years or more in jail.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. The question still has to be put to the Senate as to the increase in the number there in Section 2, Clause B, Part B. A person may, under or by virtue of any enactment, be sentenced to 5 or more years of imprisonment. Yes, sir.
Thank you. No, I just wanted to ask the Attorney General, what is the challenge of raising it to be higher, especially since the crime is not similar to other crimes?
So, once again, you want to have this as wide as possible as the baseline offense. The baseline offense is not our consideration. The person is going to be charged with the baseline offense in any event. So they stand to be sentenced in the court for that charge separately. Once you actually hit domestic terrorism, the definition of domestic terrorism, it doesn't actually matter where your baseline offense starts. Your range is up to life imprisonment. So if the court deems that the baseline offense and the circumstances in which it was considered don't actually qualify as domestic terrorism, then you're not going to get a penalty under domestic terrorism. So we're trying to make the base as broad as possible to bring it to then be considered under the definition of domestic terrorism. So it doesn't help anybody to increase the base or increase the qualification for the base, because then you might actually have people slipping out. In the premises, sir, I move that clause 2 stand part as it stands.
The question is that clause 2 stand part as is. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. And those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Clause 3.
Sir, as indicated in clause 3, I wish to move an amendment to clause 3 by deleting clause 3 subclause 4. So the clause that starts with the commission of an act of domestic terrorism should be considered an aggravating factor and ends with serious criminal offense. So that is deleted in its entirety. So clause 3 will consist now of clause 3.1, clause 3.2, and clause 3.3 as it stands now. So I'm moving that amendment, sir.
The question is that clause 3 be amended to delete section 4 such that it reads clause 3, sections 1, 2, and 3. Those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
In the premises, sir, I now move that clause 3 as amended stand part.
Question is that clause 3 as amended stand part. Those honorable senators in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
I beg, sir, that you do not report to His Honor the President passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honor the President the passing of one bill in Senate. Those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported to me the passing of one bill in committee. Attorney General.
Sir, I beg to move that this bill be now read for a third time.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I do now move that this bill be passed and cited as the Domestic Terrorism Act 2026.
The question is that this bill be now passed and be cited as the Domestic Terrorism Act 2026. Will those honorable senators in favor please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited.
Order number 1, sir. In the name of the Honorable Minister of Home Affairs and Information, to move the second reading of the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill 2026.
We want to recognize the presence of the Honourable Minister of Home Affairs and Information, the Honourable Gregory Nichols MP, and invite him to move the bill through its stages.
I can say it for the public record. Mr. President, I am pleased to rise today to move the second reading of the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill. This bill, as you are well aware, passed through the other place last week. It represents, sir, a significant enhancement of our national border security apparatus, as well as an enhancement of our immigration security framework in Barbados. The bill, sir, makes provision for the collection, transmission, the processing, and the sharing of advanced passenger information between Barbados and our partners within the regional security network, as well, sir, as our international partners. It makes provision also for the first time for passenger name record data in respect of persons traveling by air and sea into and out of Barbados. I must say at the outset, Mr. President, that the bill does not purport to introduce something that is alien or foreign to the country. Since the year 2007, when Barbados, like many other countries in the Caribbean, were making arrangements for the hosting of the ICC Cricket World Cup in 2007, a framework for advanced passenger information sharing has been in place. And since then, Barbados has been able to join with the regional partners in dealing with what they call APIS information, Advanced Passenger Information Systems. Our Immigration Act, as it presently stands, Mr. President, was amended in 2006 to make provision for APIS information. What we have under this bill is a new framework, a single statutory framework that takes us beyond the narrow, or I wish to say the specific concerns of our Immigration Act, and deals with our border security protection and our our immigration enforcement capacity in a consolidated statutory framework. Mr. President, the bill is important because it fulfills our commitment to these regional security initiatives led by the CARICOM Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, otherwise called CARICOM Impacts, through their Advanced Passenger Information System and the CARICOM Electronic Manifest Single Window. This aligns Barbados with many international standards under the International Civil Aviation Convention, and certainly, sir, as it relates particularly to the passenger name record framework, the International Maritime Organization, and Interpol. I must again place my profound thanks and gratitude to the legal team at CARICOM Impacts. They provided the legal framework for the draft model bill, which has been enacted in a number of Caribbean jurisdictions. Barbados, therefore, is not the first to put this legislative regime in place. I must say, though, however, that I'm proud to say that we have been able to work with CARICOM Impacts and our Chief Parliamentary Counsel and the Immigration Department to refine the model bill to make it more suitable for Barbados, more adaptable to Barbados's governance structure, and indeed, we believe that we have been able to help CARICOM Impacts even accept refinements to its own model law. Mr. President, it cannot be denied that in the contemporary environment that we live in, we can no longer depend on securing our borders when people arrive at them. Modern border management, sir, will require us to act long before people arrive in Barbados. This requires advanced intelligence electronic data exchanges, risk assessments based on the information gathered, and a timely identification of threats long before they arrive. Some may ask, why now? But it is important for the country to know who is traveling, to assess whether the person poses a risk to Barbados, a risk to border security, public safety, and to allow us to be able to respond to the challenges before these threats reach our border. So it is not mainly about information collection. This bill is about risk management, sir. It is about targeted intervention and an intelligence-led border system. Mr. President, at present, the Barbados Immigration Department, along with the other security agencies of the state, are participating in a robust discussion on enhancing our border security at present. Because of those considerations, sir, you would understand that I am not at liberty to go into detail on what is entailed in our border security upgrade. But certainly, I must give the country the assurance that we're doing everything, not only to align Barbados with international best standards, not only to ensure that we are able, sir, Mr. President, to be able to facilitate cooperation with other international and regional partners, but we are also doing our very level best to give Barbados the state-of-the-art modern border management system that we can all be proud of and go to sleep at night knowing that the country remains safe. Mr. Speaker, it cannot be denied, Mr. President, sorry, it cannot be denied that the movement of people across borders has become more fluid, more faster, even more complex. They are more interconnected than before. We have criminals, we have traffickers, persons traveling, sir, on fraudulent travel documents, people who are trafficking in persons, trafficking in firearms, and trafficking in illicit drugs, trying to use the poor state of our borders or the perceived poor state of our borders to be able to move their illicit and illegal international activity from one location to the other. Indeed, our security partners have told us that with the apparent, let me coach my words very carefully, summary execution of people in the Caribbean Sea, that Barbados must gird up its borders because persons trying to avoid being blown out of the Caribbean Sea might try to use the Eastern Caribbean as a gateway to get their illicit activities into the places that they are destined for. That is what our international partners are working with us to ensure that the word does not get out that we have porous borders. This legislation is therefore timely, Mr. President, and I believe that the architecture of the bill set out in its 8 parts and 6 schedules allows us to lay a legislative framework, Mr. President, that meets these targeted objectives. Sir, I will not detain the Senate in going through all of those 8 parts or the 6 schedules. But it's important for me to say, Mr. President, that the bill will be administered by the Chief Immigration Officer, and the Chief Immigration Officer will be charged with overseeing that secure transmission, storage, processing, and sharing of API and PNR data. It establishes a passenger information unit for the first time, and that unit, as the bill sets out, comprises a number of important security officials within the country, including, and not limited to, the Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defense Force, the Commissioner of Police, the Chief Medical Officer, the Immigration Officer, Chief Data Protection Officer, and other members of the state. They will receive, store, process, and manage the data, and be responsible for making decisions collectively as to how this is used. This is a deliberately styled multi-agency in its composition and reflects the reality that passenger data is relevant to multiple sectors and lawful state functions, and not only to the Immigration Department alone. I also want to highlight, Mr. President, the importance of the data protection officer who will be appointed under this Act. And this is not the same officer under the Data Protection Act. It is important for us to embed in this legislation a data protection framework that does not bring us into conflict with the 2019 Data Protection Act. And that is because we treat the security and protection of personal data belonging to persons traveling in and out of Barbados very seriously. That officer will oversee compliance with the Data Protection Act, monitor processing activities, conduct risk assessments, handle concerns and complaints, and provide advice on the operations of this legislation to the Chief Immigration Officer and the members of the the Passenger Information Unit. Mr. Speaker, Mr. President, and you will forgive me. The difference is that I have left and I'm not still here like you. I hope you get there sometime. Mr. President, there are three types of information that this bill concerns. Advanced passenger information, which includes the biographical and travel document data, such as name, nationality, passport details, date of birth, gender, flight and voyage information. Some people will ask, why do we need to have this information of people coming to Barbados before they arrive? They might ask, why do we send this information to other countries before they leave Barbados? But sir, in my short time as a minister responsible for immigration and being part of the country's national security apparatus, I can tell you that there is a considerable value in having this advanced information. Sir, we are able to make determinations as to who should be permitted to enter the country and who should be prohibited from entering the country based on our ability to work with our regional and international partners. And I have had, sir, to make determinations that persons cannot enter Barbados, which can pose significant threats to our national security. People who have been given their own national and domestic security agencies help, leaving their countries, going to other countries, plotting and planning with other suspected criminal elements and planning to come to Barbados, particularly during holidays and national festivals. This information allows us to make assessments as to what is a threat before it arrives in Barbados. And in the earlier debate, I heard congratulations being given to the police service, and that might be so, and I do agree. But the police work is done domestically. This legislation gives us the ability to cooperate to ensure that these threats coming to our borders are minimized. In relation to the passenger name record data, this is slightly different from the APIS information, and this speaks to information generated in the ordinary course of booking and reservations. Persons, booking details, the credit card information. And why this is important, Mr. President? People might travel in groups. Some of those persons in groups, Mr. President, might be people who are subject to human trafficking. Some of them might not be able to speak English, and only the lead person in that group can speak English, holding all of the passports. And the immigration officer might be able to detect there is some uneasiness when some of the persons traveling in those groups are asked basic questions. They don't know where their final destination is. They don't know persons in the other persons in the travel party. They have a very fleeting understanding as to the person who's leading the travel party. Now, a skillful immigration officer might be able to detect these things at the port. But what we will have, sir, is that where there is multiple bookings from one credit card and that history is created, all that information, we get that long before the persons come to our borders. And we are able to make determinations, Mr. President, long before the immigration officer is required to make an eyeball judgment as to a perceived case of human trafficking. Sir, the bill requires us to assemble in all embarkation and disembarkation data, and may I say for the benefit of some of the doubtful Thomases who might no doubt speak here, sir, or elsewhere. This information relates to passenger and crew. This is not something that Barbados is delving into alone. Indeed, if you had to travel to the United States or to any of the big international cities in the Western world, you will realize that all of this information is supplied from when you book. You don't just book the date you travel, the flight number. You are putting in information which is being gathered by the airline, and the airline is required under those countries' laws to supply that information to them long before you arrive. So for those of you who are saying that Big Brother is coming around, and I've seen some of the comments when this bill went to the other place in the comment section in the media, that is fair game. But I want to give the Senate and through you, sir, the country the assurance that this collection of data is not for curiosity, but allows us to compare declared travel information against travel documents, watch lists, and all the risk indicators that we are having access to. The objective, therefore, is to detect threats, prevent the entry of persons of concern, and more importantly, to ensure that the persons who are traveling legitimately with their families for vacation, for work, for leisure, are unmolested as they come through our borders and they leave the country. The bill imposes clear obligations, sir, on all aircraft and vessel operators. The captains and masters and agents must transmit API and PNR data electronically through the CARICOM electronic manifest single window within the prescribed time frames. And we want to reiterate here, I did it in the other place, and Mr. President, you will forgive me if I do so again. Barbados will not be tolerating vessels and carriers that do not comply with this legislation. It is also important, sir, for me to say that this legislation will apply to aircraft and vessels arriving and departing from Barbados, transiting through Barbados, including airlines with code shared services. It also deals with the technical stops and creates a mechanism for waivers in only very limited circumstances, such as for military or legal enforcement or humanitarian and emergency relief and other exceptional national interest situations. You will see, if you have the time, to compare this exception to the operation of the legislation, that Barbados is a little different to the other Caribbean countries which have implemented this, because we believe that we cannot envisage all of the circumstances in which a vessel or an aircraft might want to have an exception. I believe that this bill has eliminated the ability of a minister to grant whole-scale waivers, as was set out in the model legislation. This is a practical bill, Mr. President, very practical. It carries clear timelines, clear formats, and clear methods of submissions. This data, when collected, can only be used for legitimate security reasons. It is not accessible by any other state agency for any other purpose. In particular, the data may be only used for screening against watch lists and approved databases, to conduct risk assessments of passengers and crew, detect and prevent terrorism and serious crime, to facilitate immigration and border security enforcement purposes, and to targetedly assess and analyze threats. This bill cannot be used to, the legislation or the information gathered under this bill cannot be used by the state in a way to spy on people. That is why a data protection officer and a passenger information unit are critical components to the operations of this legislation to ensure that the rights of people are not trampled upon. Mr. Speaker, I don't have, I believe, to go through all of the pillars of the data protection that have been enforced in the legislation, but I must indicate, sir, that where there's a positive match, it is reviewed by some human action and assessed by the passenger information unit. So we are not subjecting anyone to the algorithm or to what the data comes up as a hit. The depersonalization of the passenger name record data after 6 months is embedded in the legislation, and sensitive personal data only in exceptional circumstances can be stored, and if it is revealed, it must be immediately deleted in accordance with the Act. The data can be stored for no more than 7 years, and that is where there is an assessed hit. So if there is no hit, then that data cannot be stored. Again, legitimate travelers will have nothing to fear. If your name comes up against an international watch list or for any other database, then that hit is analyzed by the passenger information unit and it comes up in the system. But other than that, sir, there is no reason for any traveler to fear. Sir, I'm very happy to indicate that the administrative enforcement regime under this bill does not seek to criminalize persons for breaches. The failure to submit data could be as a result of inadvertence, mistake, or miscalculation. And therefore, the government believes, sir, that only the most serious of breaches for laws should be the subject of the criminal process. And therefore, the system of administrative penalties on a graduated scale is indeed a feature of the Act. I must also say, Mr. President, that you will not be surprised that a system of administrative fairness has been carefully embedded in this legislation to ensure that where there's complaints made by members of the public or persons who find themselves subject to an assessed hit, that they have a proper opportunity to be heard. Mr. Speaker, in conclusion, this bill is a modern security and border management system and allows us to enhance our immigration enforcement. It is necessary, and for these reasons, sir, I commend this bill to this Honourable the Senate, and I beg to move that it now be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Honourable Minister. Senator Walters.
Thank you, Mr. President. Just a couple questions for the Minister as relates to this bill. There's no question why, if we are supporting or have supported legislation to deter persons from terrorizing our communities, our neighborhoods, why we would seek not to support comprehensive legislation that supports our border and strengthens our immigration department. So no questions with the bill, Mr. President, just a few questions. Clause 6(1), when you go to, you see that is the passenger information unit, and there shall be established unit to be known as a passenger information unit, or the PIU, which shall comprise A, the Chief Immigration Officer or his nominee, B, the Commissioner of Police or his nominee, C, the Chief of Staff of the Barbados Defense Force or his nominee, D, the Comptroller of Customs or his nominee, E, the Data Protection Commissioner or his nominee, F, the Chief Medical Officer or his nominee. Mr. President, up to that point, it sounds like it has been pretty much a selection of persons who are associated with a certain level of data privacy and information that should not be widespread. But when you go into G and H, Mr. President, it seems to get a little too broad, because G says such number of other immigration officers as the Chief Immigration Officer determines. And I think, Mr. President, that may be a bit too broad for the intent of such a unit which deals with privacy and the level of information that there will be access to, Mr. President. And even H, goes a bit further as well, giving the minister also additional powers to put on the unit other persons who possess particular expertise. And I think even if, Mr. President, you want to allow other persons to have the opportunity, maybe in instances of emergencies, that you can still control the number of persons that are allocated to the passenger information unit, Mr. President, and not just have it as such number of immigration officers as the chief immigration officer determines, and again, another wide net for the minister as he determines as well. Clause 10. Clause 10 speaks to advanced passenger information and passenger name record access. 10.1 says, no government department agency shall have direct access to API data and PNR data that is maintained by the Chief Immigration Officer and the PIU. Number 2 says, notwithstanding subsection 1, the Chief Immigration Officer may, pursuant to a written request from another government ministry, department, or agency, grant limited access to the advanced passenger information and the passenger name record data. Mr. President, I believe that we can tighten this clause 2, clause 10, section 2, clause 10.2, to give under what circumstances are they allowed to access this information. Because it seems, it just says pursuant to a written request, but if government agencies do not have direct access to this information, in one, it means, and we know for sure, Mr. President, this information is not information for everybody, for every ministry. It is really for a particular purpose, being stored for a particular time, etc., under certain conditions. I think, Mr. President, that if information is being shared to other government ministries, it should be shared under specific conditions, and those conditions should be stated within the legislation to guide those persons who have access over the legislation. If it is captured in another section that I missed, Mr. President, I'll be glad for the clarification, but I think that that should be under a certain level of control in terms of dissemination of this important information across other ministries, not just by a simple written request. I think it should be identified under what conditions this information can be transmitted to other departments. And with those few questions, I support this bill.
Thank you very much, Senator Walters. If there are no other speakers, I'd invite Senator Ford.
Good afternoon, Mr. President, Senate colleagues, and of course, broader Barbados. I'm extremely happy to see the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill for 2026 being presented today for debate, as this is one of the most important bills when it comes to our Border Patrol security in terms of individual passenger records, and also very important for the way we do business in Barbados and internationally. The bill establishes a comprehensive legal framework requiring airlines, vessel operators, and their agents to collect and transmit advanced passenger information, the APIs, and passenger name record, PNR data, to Barbadian authorities before, during, and after travel. It creates new institutional machinery, a passenger information unit, and a data protection officer role, and it plugs Barbados into the CARICOM Advanced Passenger Information System, managed regionally by CARICOM Impacts, the Implementation Agency for Crime and Security, and the Joint Regional Communications Center, JRCC. It also enables data sharing across CARICOM member states with international bodies such as Interpol. Mr. President and colleagues, this is a step in the right direction due to numerous reasons, such as the bill offers a broad data collection scope with the advanced passenger information and passenger name record, because this allows our security officials and government to receive not only information on the flights or vessels, but also on the incoming travelers and their biographic data report. The PNR also allows government to have more of a demographic analysis of the traveler entering Barbados, their booking methods, the information on their luggage, if a guardian is being used to assist the traveler, and the languages the passenger speaks, as well as other areas. From a tourism or business stakeholder perspective, this is also key because we can now further understand if our country's marketing dollars are adequately spent in the right cities in terms of the port of embarkation and in transit or the connecting ports. The PNR also allows government organizations such as the Barbados Tourism Marketing Inc. to make smarter decisions related to their marketing programs, the airline partnerships, and cruise ship arrangements. It also facilitates targeted in-market exercises to capture more international tourists, but also the diaspora who are interested in reinvesting in their home country of Barbados, or just visiting family, friends, or attending one of our great national festivals. This also allows government to make smarter decisions in terms of agriculture, manufacturing, and of course the sourcing of raw materials. The privacy safeguards listed in the bill is also very strong. Prohibits automated decision-making with adverse legal effects on individuals. It bans processing based on race, political opinion, religion, health, sexual orientation, and it mandates human review of any positive match before action is taken. It also requires a depersonalization of PNR data after 6 months and the deletion of after 7 years. Sensitive personal data must also be deleted immediately if inadvertently captured. These are some of the key areas of strengths from a security perspective and investment perspective. There are other areas that speak to the heavy penalties being imposed if protocols are violated or unauthorized access is given and use of the data occurs. And Mr. President, I believe that I must publicly congratulate a government for finally taking further steps at safeguarding our borders. There are other areas that further safeguarding can be done when we speak about the port of entry, with more effective inspection of cargo, greater inspection of the personnel who enter the port for various reasons. Just as every passenger is not a criminal, neither are the team members within those agencies. However, the world does have some bad apples, and we must do everything to protect our team members and our citizens from those bad apples. However, I digress, as this is a whole different bill that we would have to look further at the advancement to fighting crime. And in conclusion, the steps taken to safeguard our borders are very important in this ever-changing global environment of greed and anger, which also result in crime and in some instances the spread of diseases. We cannot continue with business as usual and by letting overseas companies decide what information they will and will not share with our island's authorities while requesting financial assistance. If we travel the world, our data is requested and handed over to whichever country's authorities, and we must also do the same here in beautiful Barbados. Some areas of improvement I do recommend: narrowing the health-related embarkation data field. This information resembles more the pandemic era of public health measures rather than a more flexible legislation that speaks towards public health and not limited to just declared health emergencies. Shorten or tear the PNR retention, and tighten transfer safeguards to third countries. Consider requiring data protection officers sign off before any international transfers. I also wish to reiterate, for the benefit of Barbadians in general, why this is important to tourism, as well as other sectors of the business community, of Barbadian entrepreneurs and Barbadian companies. At present, the data currently collected and used to understand where visitors, whether leisure or business, are coming from, their purpose of visit, their demographic background, the ports they are connecting through, the streets that they live on, and the storefronts that they see brand Barbados or any entrepreneur's marketing material or any business from Barbados is unfortunately not as strong as it could be because of the lateness of its capture, compilation, and the sharing to the various entities that can make the necessary decisions. This is no fault of any of the agency's team members, but truly due to the lack of the platform use. This move by the government is one that I applaud, and I ask for government to go a step further and faster at implementing a real-time data dashboard, as we are currently operating in an environment that is far more competitive than Barbados. There are numerous islands in the Caribbean who we compete with in business that have live dashboards that by the end of the day, they know where everyone is coming from and where they're staying on island from a security perspective. And that can assist in making smarter business decisions as to where to invest, where to capture more business for their citizens, and where the diaspora is located for re-engagement. This is where Barbados needs to get to, and I know firsthand that from the tourism world, we welcome the opportunity to meet with the new Minister of Home Affairs and the other ministries to finally bring this to a reality, and quickly. After all, we want to be known as a safe place to do business or live in the Caribbean, especially since we continuously champion the steps Barbados is taking at advancing the country. Then we need legislation and action that matches. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Ford. Senator Goodrich.
Thank you, Mr. President. I rise quickly to discuss this advanced passenger information and passenger name record bill of 2026. I do support the bill. I just wanted to make two comments on it because my intention of rising really was to support the chief immigration officer and any other immigration officer. So when I looked at the bill, I went to page 21, and sir, I recognize that under section 4.5, it introduces new terms such as sexual life or sexual orientation, and it sets out there the passenger assessment criteria that must not be based on certain elements. So section 5 has those new terms, sexual life or sexual orientation, that the chief immigration officer and all under that authority must not use in making any decision. However, those terms I recognize are not defined in this legislation, and it would be prudent to give the definitions of them because when I did the research, I recognized that they are not defined in the Interpretation Act. So in order to help the chief immigration officer or other officers, I believe that those terms should be properly defined in the statute. And that is the only point I have today, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Goodrich. Senator Benjamin.
Mr. President, good evening to you and good evening to my colleagues. Thank you for the birthday wishes. Mr. President, I rise in support of the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill of 2026. As I prepared for today's debate, Mr. President, I found myself thinking back to my contribution, funny enough, on the anti-gang bill in this very chamber. During that bill, I made the point, Mr. President, that the approach of this government to crime was one that was multi-pronged and multi-layered. Mr. President, I shared during that debate that the multi-pronged approach recognizes that there are some systems that are dysfunctional and require us to deconstruct entirely and reconstruct. I also made the point, Mr. President, that in the multi-layered and multi-pronged approach, we recognize that there are some agencies that perhaps need to be better resourced. We recognize that there are some bills perhaps that need to be amended when we look at the penalties. It recognizes that where there's a void or a gray area, perhaps we need to fill those voids to avoid things falling through the cracks. Mr. President, the multi-pronged and multi-layered approach also recognizes that though there are many programs for young people, for example, too many are still falling through the cracks, and it forces us to reassess what is being offered, how it is being offered, and the benefits of what is being offered. And you may be wondering, what is the relevance of that to this bill? The hope, Mr. President, as I understand it, of this government is that as we toil on and as we put our best foot forward, our best resources forward, as we look at the systems that we are currently operating in and determining what the next steps are, that over time, the country will see the benefits. And that over time, as more citizens are engaged, they may fall more deeply in love with their country, and by extension, there may be less crime. So the multi-pronged approach doesn't just see us bringing new bills. It sees a holistic approach. And it is my submission, Mr. President, that this bill is another tool in the armor of the government in the fight against crime. As I was preparing for today's debate, I was reminded of a podcast that I recently listened to, where one of our very own young, probably the youngest senator in this chamber, was being interviewed, Senator Shane Archer. And during that interview, he reminded us of something that the Honourable Prime Minister often says, which is that we are global citizens with a Barbadian passport. And whenever I hear that statement, two things come to mind. I think the message is two-pronged. One, it is a message of confidence for us, that a Barbadian should be able to step into any room, in any country, and know that we belong there. Equally, it is a message about connection, that what happens beyond our shores does not always remain beyond our shores, and that we live in a global world. Every day, people pass through Grantley Adams International Airport. We just heard Senator Rogers congratulate the students on their results, and this is the kind of time where some of them are leaving to go off to university. You may have Barbadians who have family in the diaspora who may be leaving to go and take care of an old relative overseas. And equally, we have guests who are coming to our shores to enjoy the things that we cherish. So that is the beautiful side of global movement. But Mr. President, there are people who travel for nefarious reasons and with nefarious intentions as well. They use the same aircraft, the same vessels, the same technology, and the same international connections. So the point that I'm making, Mr. President, is that crime is no longer something that is simply local or opportunistic. Crime has become something very sophisticated, very organized. It's not something that You know, people don't arrive on our shores and in the passport, something is written to make the immigration officers know this person is here for a nefarious purpose. It doesn't work like that. It's a lot more calculated. So when we speak about organized crime, you may be wondering what we're speaking on. And there's nothing I can tell you that would limit the things that organized crime refers to. But I can give a few examples. So things like drug trafficking, human trafficking, firearm trafficking, money laundering, large-scale frauds, cyber crimes. In essence, crimes that allow the criminal actors to operate across jurisdictions, to move illicit proceeds through complex channels, to exploit the technology, and to recruit across borders. And if we understand that, then we must understand that our response has to be equally coordinated and intelligence-led. Mr. President, I've said this in this chamber before, but I'll say again, for the first 6 years of my legal career, I practiced full-time at the criminal bar. And as the years passed, I recognized that I would have more and more visitors as clients, particularly in matters involving drug trafficking and sophisticated financial crimes. I recall several cases where the individuals entered Barbados carrying several blank or fraudulently prepared credit cards, and this was a ring. And I only recognized it was a ring maybe at like the 4th client that I had. They all knew each other. They all knew each other's names. It was something very organized and planned. They would come, they would purchase high-value goods, complete as many transactions as possible within that short period, and attempt to leave the country before the financial institution or the merchant detected the fraud. So by the time the alarm was raised, and obviously the ones I dealt with, they were caught, but how many more did we have, you know? Organized crime, like I said, is something that is swift, it's mobile, it's deliberate, it is highly sophisticated. So the offense may very well be committed in Barbados, but the planning, the technology, and the wider criminal network extends far beyond our shores. What this bill does is to give us a modern framework for collecting and analyzing the advanced passenger information and the passenger name record data for persons traveling into, out of, or through Barbados by air or sea. So in simple terms, the advanced passenger information helps us to know who is traveling and on what journey, while the passenger name record can help authorized officers understand relevant patterns around that journey, such as the reservation details, what credit card was used to book, the full itinerary of the passenger, whether the trip was booked through a third party or by the individual themselves, that type of information. Mr. President, human trafficking is something that is increasing globally. And the reality is that Barbados is not spared. And as a trade unionist, I can't only speak about human trafficking in terms of the crossing of borders. I must also speak about what may happen to the person when they arrive at the destination. So I want us to think about the situation where a person is recruited overseas with the promise of a decent job and good wages. They arrive already indebted because they had to pay a recruiter, they had to pay perhaps the travel costs. Upon arrival, they're taken to the employer. Perhaps their documents are being held for safekeeping. Their wages are withheld or unlawful retention fees are deducted. They're housed in degrading conditions, transported only when the employer permits it, and threatened with dismissal, deportation, retention of money, or violence if they dare complain. From a distance, to many of us, that may just seem like an employer and worker issue. It may just look like unpaid wages, a breach of contract here or there. But when you look at it deeper, it may very well be an arm of trafficking. This is the reason why this bill therefore becomes so important. The passenger information that is gathered under this bill will not by itself prove that trafficking has occurred, but when lawfully analyzed alongside other intelligence, it may help authorized agencies identify repeated travel patterns, common recruiters, coordinated bookings, and other connections that warrant closer examination. So let me be very clear, Mr. President, as I wrap up. The purpose may not be to treat vulnerable migrant workers as suspects merely because they traveled together or came to Barbados for employment. Instead, what the bill requires is a targeted, proportionate, non-discriminatory assessment, as well as human review before action is taken. Those safeguards are particularly important because the persons identified through a travel pattern may not be the criminal. They may very well be the victim. This bill therefore gives us an opportunity not only to identify who's crossing our borders, but to understand the networks that may be moving vulnerable people across those borders for exploitation. And for these reasons, Mr. President, I wholeheartedly support this bill and commend it to the Chamber.
Thank you very much, Senator Benjamin. If there are no other speakers, I'll ask Senator Nichols to wrap up. Sorry, I'll ask the Honourable Minister of Home Affairs and Information, the Honourable Gregory Nichols, MP, to wrap up.
Mr. President, I would confess that among your several powers under the standard orders, you do not have the power of relegation.
It's just that your previous seat, you look so comfortable there.
Very comfortable here.
It took me back in time. It was a back in time moment.
Sir, I think Senator Walters will also be sad to know that you do not have any magical powers of a section either. But sir, I want to thank the Senate for the smooth and efficient manner in which the second reading of this bill has proceeded through the chamber today. And I'd like to thank the members for their brief comments on the legislation. Sir, this is a new piece of legislation, and indeed, sir, it will be something that is operated almost on a daily basis by a number of important stakeholders within our security apparatus in Barbados. And a detailed and very close and intimate knowledge of the provisions of this bill is expected by a multiplicity of our public service and how they interact with our regional and international partners. In relation to a comment made, sir, I believe it was by Senator Walters, as to the use or the expected delegation of functions by the Chief Immigration Officer under Clause 6. It seems that his comment was that the named officers in this clause were sufficient, and that the other persons really and truly should not, the clause should not be as broad. One of the things I must say to the country is that the Immigration Department, under my direction, is undertaking an intensive review, not only from a digital perspective, but in terms of what are the human resource requirements in order to fulfill its obligations under this legislation, and indeed under the new immigration bill that will come back to this Parliament after having the report of the Joint Select Committee. These functions cannot be carried out by the Chief Immigration Officer alone. The amount of international partners all are not named here, because it wouldn't make sense for us to expose our methods. But the amount of international partners that we have to operate with on a daily basis, we can't expect the Chief Immigration Officer to oversee the legislation, also function within the Passenger Information Unit as the sole person that can do so. That office will have to be supported by a full department to manage the operations under this bill. And so the department now has to be reconfigured. Officers have to be trained, not only trained in the systems, but also trained in the use of the technology that is being deployed here. Assessments will have to be made, and the Chief Immigration Officer will have to rely on assessments by the junior officers or officers subordinate to the Chief Immigration Officer. And therefore, at that level, you have to rely on a core of people who, in the discretion of the Chief Immigration Officer, they might appoint to be engaged and deployed to work with the unit as their specific daily functions, whether it's secretarial, administratively, or even at the level of operations. So that the legislation is written here. I also want to make the point, Mr. President, that there are other functionaries of the state which we will not necessarily want to name here either. We don't hide, but it's not everything that you have to say from the mountaintop. And I believe it was Sir Henry Ford who told me this, that in government, you do not have to jump and shout everything from the mountaintop. You just work and do the best that you can. But there are other persons here within the national security apparatus that we could have named. But that signals to persons or sources and methods. So that is why the clause is drawn in the way that it has been drawn, to specifically not name those persons. As it relates to the comment about clause 10 of the bill, Mr. President, and the concerns are that the disclosure of information, sir. One of the fundamental things about law is that it can only be interpreted within its statutory context. The context is determined by the intent of the legislation. So that you cannot necessarily read clause 10 in isolation to determine the circumstances under which a request for information by a government agency can be made. The government agency can only make a request for information if that request is fitting within one of two things. One, the statutory purpose of that particular organization or government agency, or the statutory purpose as set out in this legislation. We have been particularly careful to ensure that there are two levels of protection for the public: the data protection officer and the passenger information unit. And if time were permitting me to do so, I would have gone through those specific provisions. But to assure, but just to assure, Mr. President, just to assure and assuage the concerns raised by Senator Walters. Mr. President, I know the Senate has had a long day, and I know the habits of the Senate very well. But I just want to assuage those concerns so that it is not that I am accused of dodging a legitimate question, that when you look at the functions of the data protection officer to manage, to audit, to assess requests, that unit or the Chief Immigration Officer cannot respond to a request for information outside of the statutory context of this legislation. In other words, if it's something of major crime or terrorism or something of that sort, if it's about a personal nature, then you will be acting outside the scope of the legislation. And the public has the protection of the data protection officer as well as the passenger information unit, which has a broader composition. Sir, there was a comment made, sir, in relation to the definition about sexual life and in the definition, sorry, in the provisions that speak to the analysis of data that cannot be done or taken to discriminate against people. Sir, when a definition or a phrase or concept is used in legislation and it is not specifically defined, you go to the ordinary dictionary meaning of the words. Sir, the reason why there is no specific definition here because we believe that ordinary common sense will prevail as to determining what aspect or degree of one's sexual life or sex life, as people may call it, is not used as a basis to discriminate. So this is not the occasion, sir, to go into the cultural or social issues that such a query might otherwise generate discussion in Barbados. Suffice to say that this provision exists in a number of international treaties that we are party to. It exists, sir, in the model bill which we have drawn this legislation from. It exists, sir, in the other CARICOM countries which have applied it, and people will know that whatever their sex life or sexual life may be or entail, that cannot be used as a basis to assess you as a hit worthy for the passenger information unit to start to target people coming into Barbados. And that, as I like to say, the mighty sparrow say, that is all, that is all, that is all. Mr. President, I therefore move that this bill now be read a second time.
Thank you very much, Senator Nicholas. Honourable Minister, Gregory Nichols, MP. The question is that this bill be read a second time. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. President, I now move that this Senate that you do know, Lady Chair, and the Senate be resolved in committee for further consideration of this bill.
The question is that it do not leave the chair, and the Honourable the Senate resolve itself to the committee for further consideration of this bill. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Senate is now in committee.
Mr. Chairman, permission to call bill in parts. Part 1, clauses 1 to 3.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 1, clauses 1 to 3 do not stand part.
The question is that Part 1, clauses 1 to 3 do not stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 4 to 6.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 2, clauses 4 to 6 stand part.
The question is, Senator Goodrich.
Thank you, sir. I noted what the minister just stated, and I just wanted to explain why I would have said that those terms should be defined. Because, sir, we live in a time where many people use different terms to describe themselves, especially when you look to the United States and countries such as Europe. So the minister would have commented just now, he said one could use actual common sense or a dictionary. But I know as an attorney that that does not stand in a court. The court has to use the ordinary and the natural meaning of the word, and then you have the attorneys, as I've stated, putting forward what they believe define the terms, if anything. And there's no issue, sir, with a term being defined to help the chief immigration officer, because we have the power to do so. And these are new terms. And when you see sexual life, and as I said, you look to USA and Europe, what is sexual life and sexual orientation? What is that for one individual is not the same for another individual. And then even if we go to the Interpretation Act and we look for the definition and we recognize those two terms are not there defined, then at this point of time, my recommendation is you can define it. Because at the end of the day, you're helping the chief immigration officer to understand what those terms are so there will be no discrimination. And I think that that's a fair point, sir.
Senator Allen.
Thank you, sir. Sir, at law, one of the base rules and principles in terms of statutory interpretation is the literal rule. It's one of the first ones, and it's the first rule that every judge should go to when interpreting a statute. And I think this accords with what my friend, the Honourable Minister, was indicating about common sense and the dictionary in terms of the meaning of words. I don't know that there's an issue in this regard.
Thank you very much. Minister Nichols.
Mr. Chairman, I will commit to the process of a review of the bill, as in the ordinary course of any bill, and if the law revision process can assist, I will do so. But at this point in time, sir, I believe that we can proceed because, as I indicated, sir, the way the broad language is used to do the very exact thing which Senator Goodrich believes we need to protect against. The more you define the term, the narrower it becomes. But if you use language that is broad, then there can be no doubt as to whether the person's lifestyle, life choices, life orientation is captured by the broad language in this legislation. And therefore, the reason why the bill does not contain a specific definition of that term is because by its very nature, sexual life or sex life is a broad encompassing concept incapable of a precise statutory definition that will fulfill the intent of the legislation. So I don't agree with that suggestion, but as I commit, we will look at it. So I beg to move, sir, that Part 2, clauses 4 to 6 stand part.
The question is that Part 2, clauses 4 to 6 do now stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. It thinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 7 to 14.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 3, clause 7 to 14 stand part.
The question is that Part 3, clauses 7 to 14 do now stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Thinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 15 to 23. To 21, sorry.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 4, clauses 15 to 21 stand part.
The question is that Part 4, clauses 15 to 21 do now stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Thinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 22 to 35.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 5, clauses 22 to 35 stand part.
Question is that Part 5, clauses 22 to 35 do now stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. And those against, please say no. Thinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 36 to 38.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 6, clauses 36 to 38 stand part.
The question is that Part 6, clauses 36 to 38 do now stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Thinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 39 to 49.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 7, clauses 39 to 49 stand part.
The question is that Part 7, clauses 39 to 49 do now stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Thanks, the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 50 to 55.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that Part 8, clauses 50 to 55 stand part.
The question is that Part 8, clauses 50 to 55 do now stand part. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
The question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
The question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Thinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
The question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Thinks the ayes have it.
Fourth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fifth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Sixth schedule.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
The question is that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
Mr. Chairman, I beg to move that you now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee.
The question is that I do now report to His Honour the President the passing of one bill in committee. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it.
The Deputy President has reported the passing of one bill in committee. Senator Nichols.
Mr. President, I beg to move the third reading of the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Bill.
The question is that this bill be read a third time. Those honourable senators in favour, please say aye. Aye. Those against, please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is read a third time.
Mr. President, I beg to move the passing of the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Act, and that it be so cited.
The question is that this bill do not pass and be cited as the Advanced Passenger Information and Passenger Name Record Act 2026. Will those honourable senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. This bill is now passed and so cited. Thank you very much, Honourable Minister Gregory Nichols, MP, for gracing us with your presence and so ably guiding the discussion on this very important piece of legislation. Senator the Most Honourable Jerome Walcott.
So, President, this brings us to the end of our business for today. And before I adjourn the Honourable Chamber for summer recess, with your permission, I would like to express appreciation to the clerk, the assistant clerk, the marshals of the House, the secretarial staff of the House, those responsible for communications and the streaming, and of course those ladies who work tirelessly interpreting for the deaf. I also want to thank those members of the Barbados Police Service and also the guards who ensure our security, and most definitely the staff in the dining room for ensuring that our nutritional needs are looked after, and not only alcoholic beverages for some of those from time to time. Mr. President, with those few words, the chair stand adjourned, sign the die. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Senator Walcott. I want to associate myself with the remarks made, and I may thank all those persons mentioned, but especially thank you, Honourable Senators, for your frequent attendance, for your rich contribution to the many diverse matters which we have dealt with over the past few months, for the depth of your discussion, as well as the height of merriment, such as within the narrow confines allowed in this chamber, but you certainly have been able to have some levity whilst we debated matters, and generally for the camaraderie and conviviality displayed among senators around the table. So I want to thank you all, thank the clerks, of course, and wish everyone a good break, however long or short that may be. I've been asked to remind the honourable senators that dinner will be available at 6 p.m. I don't know if it means that there'll be happy hour. It seems to be 1 hour between now and dinner. Unfortunately, I will not be able to tarry with you. I have to move on to another event for which there's still some preparation. But I guess you all will be happy and I may be unhappy. But the question is that the Honourable the Senate do not adjourn, sign the die. Will those Honourable Senators in favour please say aye? Aye. Those against please say no. Methinks the ayes have it. The Senate stands adjourned, sign the die.